Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharatataila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaya Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all for joining us after a hiatus of about 4 months. I've been looking forward to this class and resuming the Gita from chapter 16. If you remember, at the end of chapter 15, I mentioned that the rest of the Gita will not be so deep Vedantic philosophy. For some, that may come as a relief, while others may feel disappointed. But there really isn't any need for either one. Why? Because the remaining content of the Gita will be about the conditions and preparations needed to put the Vedantic teachings into practice. Without the practicals, well, theory just remains theory. So this is how he's going to bring us into that teaching even deeper through helping us formulate and bring about the proper virtues and values inside of us. The practical application of Amma's teachings is where most of us struggle. We must have heard her satsangs many, many times, but our inner preparation is lacking. That's why we may feel that Advaitic teachings are a dry intellectual exercise. That means that the teaching needs to drop from our head to our heart, and only then will it purify our character. The biggest problem is that most of the usual fields of knowledge are based on objective knowledge, not subjective knowledge. So objective knowledge means I can look at my hand and see it. It's an object in the standpoint of my eye, at least. Or we can look at the clouds, or we can look at nature. But subjective knowledge is I'm experiencing it all the time. So I have general knowledge about a black hole, but I can never experience it. That would be a disastrous experience, of course. And I may have a basic understanding of the dinosaurs or the French Revolution or something like that, but I wasn't there in person, at least not in this body. In the case of Vedanta, learning and experiencing are very similar because I'm learning about my own self, my true self, which I'm always experiencing throughout the day as that feeling, I have to do this, I just woke up, I'm going to bed, I'm hungry. All these things, that I is a reflection of that true self. We just don't feel it with full awareness. We sort of use that word I carelessly. We don't realize that we're referring to pure consciousness. See, the self is the only entity that is available at all times in the form of the I. And that's what I feel all the time. I feel that I'm doing this, or I need this, I want that, I don't like this. All that I is really my true self, covered with layers of unnecessary vasanas and so on. But as we learn, the knowledge is immediately experienced. There's also a possibility that, like a so-called guru, an unqualified guru would give a teaching that is not correct. Or it might be that the student is not able to grasp the teaching. Either way, the real problem boils down to lack of preparation on the part of the student, because he cannot understand what a genuine teacher is, a genuine guru like Amma, or he cannot understand the teaching of a genuine teacher. We may not be able to understand Amma's teachings, or we may think somebody has real teachings, but they don't. It's our own problem, actually, because we're not properly prepared. I'll give you an example of what happens when people are not prepared and try to take on big roles. It was a long time ago, probably 20 years ago. And in Chennai, with the name for Madras, there was some kind of spiritual gathering. And there were a lot of people there to witness it and to partake in it. And it just so happened that there were two people who claimed to be Kalki, which is supposed to be the 10th avatar of Lord Vishnu. And it is said, the legends are that he is the most powerful avatar of Lord Vishnu. So you can imagine there's a lot of people saying, that's me, I'm the one, like that. So there were two people who claimed to be that avatar, and they were on the same stage. How's that going to turn out? The first Kalki was saying all these teachings like he was saying that he was the 10th avatar. And then when the next Kalki came on, he said, don't listen to him, he's lying, everything is not true, I'm the real Kalki. And then they had a terrible argument, and it went down to fisticuffs, or a real knockdown, drag-out fight on the stage. Never seen or heard of an avatar doing that. Obviously, they were not prepared. They thought they were, but definitely not. All of this shows us just how important that inner preparation is. Just think how long it took to come up with a viable design for the Golden Gate Bridge. Over 15 years. But the construction took only 4 years. And now it serves 100,000 people every day. And the plans for the Hoover Dam took over 30 years, but the construction only took 5 years. And now it generates electricity for over 1.3 million people. The point is that preparation is more important than the actual execution of everything. If we too prepare ourselves in advance of trying to reconstruct ourselves, so to speak, maybe someday we too will be able to help many people. The beautiful thing is that once we have the requisite qualities in our thoughts, words, and actions, we don't have to struggle anymore to understand the Guru's teachings, because the mind is perfectly receptive. That's the goal. It is conducive to the assimilation of Vedanta. Amma doesn't have to repeat it 100 times. So the struggle is in molding and in forging such a mind. And as we do so, the struggle in absorbing Amma's teachings decreases. Like if we were to be asked, what did Amma say this morning? What were all her points that she said when she was talking with the kids or in between? It's hard to remember. Or even worse, in her 2019 satsang here in Chicago, we were all there. What did she say? I don't think any of us could remember anything. That's why we need this preparation. Our absorption capacity will be greater. So like anything, the more you prepare yourself for it, the easier it becomes to make it part of you. And we definitely want to make all these teachings part of us. And that is why Krishna is going to dedicate 2 full chapters to such preparations, chapter 16 and 17. And chapter 18 is more of a summary, like the essence of the whole Gita, just like chapter 2 was. And in this chapter 16, Krishna is going to speak of the preparations in terms of what is called Daivi Sampat, the divine wealth. And the opposite as well, Asuri Sampat, which it's hard to call it the demonic wealth, so we could call it the abundance of demonic traits. In Sanskrit, they use the same word wealth for divine and demonic. Maybe it's sarcasm on the part of the Sanskrit translation. But in chapter 17, Krishna basically says the same thing, but in a different context, in the context of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Those three kinds of behavior are what he presents. The terms are a little bit different, but the goal is still inner preparation, which is called sadhana chatushtaya sampattihi in common language of the scriptures. It means you have fulfilled the prerequisites for studying Vedanta and actually learning from a guru. And just to make you feel better, none of us have those qualities now, so don't worry. That was the traditional, classical version of it. Now, I think because it's Kali Yuga and it's a desperate time, Amma is disregarding all those rules and saying, I can't wait for you guys to get your act together. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to give you all these teachings even though you don't qualify for them, because the world needs it. But traditionally, you had to get all these wonderful qualities and virtues beforehand. But without that, anyhow, it's true that the knowledge of the self may be possible, but it gets isolated right here. And we never experience it truly. That means that there won't be any real significant change in our life. So we remain stuck in samsara. And when you're stuck in samsara, you're stuck with all the suffering it brings as well. So don't feel, like it's hopeless. We're going to learn what we need to do, what qualities we need to absorb and cultivate in order to fix that problem. Usually we go through the structure of the chapter before we actually jump into it. So the first 3 verses are about the divine wealth, Daivi Sampat. And then the 5th verse is the outcome of both the demonic and divine traits. And verse 4 plus verse 6 through 21 is all about the demonic traits. I wonder why he would talk more about those. I don't have any demonic traits, so it's not about me. No, it's about all of us. That's why, because we have so many demonic traits that we need to catch and be aware of. And as usual, the end of the chapter is 3 verses on the fruit or the results of this teaching and overall conclusion. In sum, Krishna is going to say that this divine wealth of virtues leads to moksha, to liberation. So they always start with like a carrot, this is what you are going to get out of it. And one might say, well, why do we need a carrot? Because when you start applying yourself to cultivate those virtues and get rid of the negative ones, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. So we have to remind ourselves, there's a purpose, there's a reason why I'm doing this. Krishna told me, Amma told me, so I'm going to stick with it. But all of this set aside, it is a foregone conclusion that we have a living Sadguru, and that we're learning from the Sadguru and contemplating on her teachings. Amma has said so many things, like attempting sadhana, spiritual practices, without a guru will lead to trouble. That means you're going to either go in the wrong way or you're going to get egoistic about it or something. She also says it is not possible to proceed very far on the spiritual path without a guru. So you may get to a certain point, then you run into the brick wall of your vasanas, negativities, and if you don't have a guru, you're really going to struggle to cross over those. And she also says, children, spiritual life without a guru is like a child without a mother. Whatever it is, it's definitely not easy. It's not, if you try it yourself, you'll understand, believe me. But once a living Satguru comes in the picture and the disciple lives the path of wisdom given by the Satguru, that means that such Daivi Sampat, these divine virtues, will give moksha. Really, the Guru is giving moksha, but our effort is what they want to see. And our effort in this case is cultivating these virtues. And we can say that those divine qualities facilitate moksha, and at the same time demonic tendencies, demonic qualities preclude the attainment of moksha, of liberation. And just imagine, well, what if a person of a demonic temperament studies the Gita or Vedanta? Well, I'll tell you what happens. It only feeds the fire of their negative tendencies, like arrogance and vanity. Instead of pride of worldly knowledge, it becomes pride of spiritual knowledge. It's just the object of pride that changes, not the pride itself. And that is precisely why some scriptures emphasize not teaching such knowledge to unworthy, quote-unquote, unworthy students. It sounds biased, right? But in ancient times, they had various terms to refer to those who lack the proper disposition. I'll tell you a story that you understand why. And in later times, unfortunately, such terminology acquired like a socio-economical nuance as well. And that led to criticism of the scriptures on the basis of just a wrong interpretation. The idea is, if you are prone towards egotism and you hear that you're Brahman, then you think, wow, I knew I was God from the very beginning. Now I have a scriptural confirmation of it. So there's a beautiful story in the Chandogya Upanishad. It's about about Indra and Virochana. Indra, some of you may know, is the king of the gods, or we would say demigods probably, not God, period. And he had divine qualities. And Virochana, king of the asuras, king of the demons, well, what kind of traits do you think he had? Demonic qualities. And both of them learned Vedanta, the non-dual philosophy, from the creator, Brahmaji himself. Can you imagine? What a beautiful opportunity, but I'd rather hear it from Amma anyhow. But there are people who spend thousands of years in the scriptures just to get that chance to hear the Vedanta from Brahmaji. We don't have to do that. But the interesting thing is that Virochana understood things only on the physical level because that's where his awareness was. And since he took it on the wrong level, his behavior became even worse. He thought, wow, I'm not only the king of the asuras, I'm Brahman also. And in the Gita, I learned that it says to relinquish all dharma so I can do whatever I want. Really, the relinquishing dharma means don't try to do good things for the sake of some going to heaven or something like that. And just do what is best for your spiritual growth. But he misinterpreted it. And initially, Indra, even though he had a lot of divine qualities, he didn't understand properly. But what did he do? He did the right thing. He came back to Brahmaji for further clarification. Amma talks about that as mananam. You contemplate on how you understood the subject matter, and if you didn't get it properly, or if you're confused about some things, you have to go back to the Guru and get clarification. And when he went back to Brahmaji, the creator, Brahmaji, encouraged Indra to cultivate divine virtues, like humility and compassion and so on. And this helped him tremendously. And then Brahmaji taught him again. In fact, Indra had to hear it 4 times to get it. And then he attained self-realization. It'd be nice to only have to hear it 4 times and get self-realization. Some of Amma's teachings we've heard thousands of times. The point is that this story also helps us understand the significance of this entire chapter. Without divine virtues, we too can easily become like the demon king, Virochana. And Krishna will also enumerate many demonic qualities through this second half, or the 3/4 of it, basically, of this chapter. And he's going to emphasize in verse 21, 3 characteristics, demonic characteristics, that we should avoid at all costs. When you hear what they are, then you understand that we all have a lot of demonic traits in us. This is the way he puts it. Triple is this gate of hell, destructive of the self. And then hyphen, uncontrollable desire, anger, and greed. So it's not uncontrollable anger, it's just uncontrollable desire, anger, and greed. Therefore, one should abandon these 3. Now, what is an uncontrollable desire? Well, it means if it's something cannot be controlled, especially a desire, what's the outcome? It controls us. Either you control the desire or the desire controls you. And if it is the latter, we're in trouble. I mean, there's innocent desires to smell a flower or to see a bird or go for a walk or something like that. But there are these desires that just take over the mind, and you lose your judgment as a result. That's the ones he's talking about. We truly want to abandon them, but they are too strong. That's the problem. And interestingly, a frontal attack won't go well because it fights back. All of our desires do, the uncontrollable ones. But there's a way to sneak in through the back door. What is that? We can subdue uncontrollable desires through a life of gratitude and contentment. You replace the demonic qualities with divine ones. We can subdue anger through practicing patience, and greed through a life of sharing. So the word that is used for greed here in this verse, that 21st verse, is lobha. And it's translated as greed, but for what little I have learned and understood, lobha seems to pertain more to what you do not yet possess. So it's not really clinging to possessions, it's more like covetousness and avarice. And at the end of the chapter, Krishna will reinforce the benefit of cultivating these divine virtues. He's going to say that the source is the scriptures, which we're hearing here, but there's a lot more of such teachings in Amma's books. That's our real scripture. So you can read any of Amma's books, start from volume 1 and just read everything. And then you can mark, when Amma talks about a trait or a quality or a virtue, we can make note of that and add that to the list. So far I have a list of about 75 qualities on the homework assignment. So demonic characteristics come from tamas and rajas, and understand that divine characteristics come from sattva. So that earlier in the Gita also we learned that sattva, which is inner purity, is what helps us understand these teachings. And before we go into the very first verse, I will tell you where these virtues abide in the Gita, as far as I could tell. We already went through the first 2 chapters that have them, which is 12 and 13. There were 39 virtues in chapter 12 and 20 virtues in chapter 13. This 16th chapter has 26. And they come in a different format in chapter 17, so it's kind of hard to compare them directly, but just expect to get a lot of, it's more about our behavior, that's why can't really compare it so much. Now let us dive in to the first verse, which is going to provide us with 9 of the 26 virtues that we will get in this chapter. There's one line that comes at the beginning. It's in Sanskrit at the top. You might not be able to read it, but it is how each chapter begins. Ata shodashodhyayah daivasura sampad vibhaka yogaha Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Apayam Sattva Samshuddhir Jnana Yoga Vyavastitihi Danam Damascha Yajñascha Swadhyayas Tapa Arjavam. As you probably know, I have take some creative liberties in rendering the translations. Fearlessness, the Blessed Lord said, fearlessness, purity of mind, which we're going to call inner purity. Steadfastness in knowledge and yoga. That part that says of meditation, we can put that in parentheses. Charity, control of the senses. Yajna, instead of sacrifices. Reading, and we can put in parentheses study, of the Shastras, which is scriptures. Austerity, uprightness. So now I'll read it one more time with the version that I prefer. The Blessed Lord said, fearlessness, inner purity, steadfastness in knowledge and yoga, charity, control of the senses, yajna, reading and studying of the scriptures, austerity, and uprightness. So there are actually 2 more verses coming after this. But this one gives us plenty to think about for tonight. 9 characteristics that we need to focus on here. And why I changed those words, we'll see as we go along. I can explain all that. So these 26 virtues that he's providing in this chapter are not negotiable. Basically, every seeker needs to cultivate them. But fortunately, some of them we've already heard about in earlier parts of the Gita. But surprisingly, the very first one, fearlessness, abhayam, is coming for the very first time in the Gita. And the reason why I say it's curious is because we experience it every day. It's like one of our best friends, fear, like a bad companion, you know. In modern parlance, we would call it probably something like insecurity, anxiety, worry, all these things. All these things come from fear. There's so many things to worry about every day, right? Am I going to get that new job? Am I going to get a raise? Am I going to get a house, a mortgage? Or, am I going to be able to sell my house? Am I going to get a life partner? Am I going to get rid of my life partner? Am I going to have a child? Or, all these things. And if none of this apply to you, then you know what your list is. So it's not like you don't have them. Basically, the categories are almost always the same for everybody around the world, no matter what their age is. It'll be something about health, it'll be something about human relations, and it'll be something about money. And work kind of is half human relations, and half money. So it's still covered there. But fearlessness means that we have no anxiety at all about any of these. Just imagine if you didn't worry about any of these things ever. And don't forget, it's possible. It's not like an impossible task. And Amma says that it's possible to execute all of your duties, your family duties, without anxiety. The reason why is because attention to detail, being thorough, being careful, and all these things that we need to succeed, they don't necessarily, they're not part of fear, actually. You're doing it because that's the right thing to do. You're taking care of your family because it's the right thing. You're meticulous in how you do your work and how you make your offerings to your family, your world, the world, and to yourself. But that's not out of fear, it's just the right thing to do. But to keep fear out of the picture, we need surrender. We just need to leave the rest to Amma after our effort. Because our effort is only one of countless factors. Remember, Amma used to say that after the satsangs towards the end, every day. So ultimately, a combination of God's will and our karma is what's going to prevail. And if we can surrender to that, that is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. Some people think that only the weak people surrender. It's the other way around. It takes a lot of inner strength to accept a circumstance and deal with it even though you don't like it. So Jnanadev, you might remember, my favorite commentator, gives several tips on how to be fearless. Reduce the feeling of doership and attribute it to God instead. So for us, when you're about to do something important, you can just say, look, you know I don't know how to do this on my, why am I doing this? Somehow I got in this position. You're going to have to do it. Otherwise, it's going to be a complete flop. So it's all in your hands now. Doesn't mean you don't make any effort. You still make your effort to the maximum, but you just handed over the doership to Amma. So if it goes well, then Amma did it. If it doesn't go well, we can say, well, I guess I needed to practice a little bit more. You know, Amma's not harming me intentionally. The second thing he says is try to see oneness with an all-embracing notion towards everything, coming from the vision of Advaita, non-duality. So we heard a lot of this in the past 15, 14, 13 verses, a lot of talk about the Advaitic teachings, seeing everything as God. So once we do that, really, how can fear affect us? Once there was a North Indian saint who had a disciple, a well-known Gita commentator who passed away a couple decades ago. And that guru used to walk around through the jungle next to the ashram in dusk time, which is usually when all the wild animals come out. This is probably about 100 years ago, which means that there were lots of like tigers and, pumas or whatever, the leopards and all that. So it was a shocking thing because people, you could really get killed by the animals. So one day somebody asked him, how can you do that? Walk through the jungle. Aren't you afraid? And he said, what is there to be afraid of? Everything is me. I'm not afraid of myself. Now compare that with what Winston Churchill said in the Parliament. Somebody asked him, how can you make these speeches in front of all the people in the Parliament, such strong and so much conviction? He says, I just look out there at the audience and I say, these people are all idiots. Then I start my speech. Which one is the divine trait and which one is the demonic trait? I'll let you decide that one. The third suggestion Jnanadev gives is, remember that everything is equal from the standpoint of Advaita. It's a corollary of the oneness, right? Just like all forms made of ice dissolve and merge when placed in water. So whatever the situation I'm in, this is the adversary, this is my ally, what is all this stuff? You take all these people, when you dissolve them in the Atman, we're all the same. There's no difference between us. So why am I afraid? And another commentator has a beautiful thing he says, fear is based on the ignorance that we are the body and not the Atman. It thus obstructs not only spiritual growth, but all of our other efforts as well. Really makes you want to kind of apply yourself in getting rid of fear. The second quality mentioned was inner purity. And the Sanskrit word is sattva samshuddhihi. That actually means it's pointing out sattva. So sattva is becoming purified. What does that mean? I thought it was already purified. It's a reference to the mind, because if you remember, maybe you don't remember, but anyhow, the mind is the product of all the sattva properties of the 5 gunas. Actually, it's the tanmatras, the gunas in their subtle form. And that comprises not only the mind, but also the intellect, ego, memory, and our organs of perception like smell, hearing, etc. But think about it. Practically speaking, where are we? Are we in the energy sheath? Are we in the intellectual sheath? Or are we in the emotional sheath most of the time? Well, it's emotions. Thoughts are basically, the product of emotions. So we're mostly in our mind all day long. So that's what's important, the purity of our mind. But we can call it inner purity because it does include the other elements as well. Shankaracharya says that examples of inner purity are abandoning dishonesty, deception, falsehood, and so on in all actions. Or you can put it the other way around. He says it means perfect honesty. And another commentator says, one is said to be established in inner purity when one feels no difference whatsoever between the welfare of oneself and the welfare of others. Does that remind you of somebody? Amma takes it even farther because she's more concerned about other people's welfare than she is with her own. She actually violates this rule because she goes beyond. You might have heard the story I told in Amrita Puri. It was a live stream, but I'll say it again because you might have missed it also. We were in, it was the 2019 tour, and we were in Singapore. Amma was about to go to the hall, and she called me for something, and I went there. And I was happy to see that somebody was making a tea for Amma. And it wasn't Sri Lakshmi Prana, it was somebody else. And so I was happy because Amma usually doesn't eat or drink anything before she goes for the program on most days. So I thought, great, maybe she'll have a sip of tea or something. And then when the person finished making the tea, they walked over towards Amma, but probably they couldn't see that there was a wet spot on the floor. And the person slipped just a little bit, but that was enough for the piping hot tea to splash out of the mug and land right on Amma's foot. Piping hot, it was just right off the stove. And both myself and that other person, we shouted, "Ayyo, Amme!" And then Amma said, No, don't worry. It's not a problem because it didn't get on the carpet. It only landed on Amma's foot. And I was like, who cares about the carpet? And she didn't even think about her foot. She just was happy that it didn't land on their carpet. We were at a person's house, right? We were at a devotee's house. Now, what kind of a human being thinks like that? It's so frustrating, I must admit. But whatever, it's beyond what the Gita says, I guess, in one sense. Even in a general sense, purity simply means the absence of any foreign element. It's not like purity is this. It means once you remove everything that doesn't belong there, it's pure. It's a really simple concept. But in the Advaitic sense, in the Vedantic sense, a foreign element to me, to us, includes everything. Everything other than pure consciousness, the Atma. So applying this to the mind, any thoughts that encourage identification with anatma, the non-self, or what is unreal, those thoughts are impure. So Amma has said, sin is basically whatever takes you away from your true self. That's all it is. So we have to reprogram ourselves. I'm not a sinner, or I am, but maybe for the wrong reason, for a different reason. So by this definition, the only truly pure people are realized beings. And for the rest of us, it's just a matter of degree. A little bit of purity, a lot of purity, less purity, that's all it is. And when we allow the mind to indulge in a lot of negative thinking, we are forgetting about the cost. We may think nobody knows what I'm thinking about. That doesn't matter. There's a cost to you. Because the more we nurture such negative thoughts, the more emotionally invested we become in those thoughts. And then they start to influence our words and actions. In chapter 2, verses 62 and 63, there's a very famous couplet of verses that I will read, just the English because we have time limit here. Pondering, this is actually known as, in some quarters, as the 8-runged ladder of human destruction. Doesn't sound very good, does it? Pondering on objects of the senses, one develops attachment for them. From attachment springs desire, and desire gives rise to anger. From anger arises delusion. From delusion comes unsteadiness of memory. From unsteadiness of memory comes the destruction of the intellect. And when the intellect is destroyed, one perishes. Because the only thing that sets us aside from other beings in nature is that we have discernment, we have viveka, we can choose to do something or not do it. So if you lose your intellect, it's like there's no point in having a human being, having human birth. That's why it says one perishes. And where does it start? Just pondering on a few senses, a few objects. That's all. So that does have a effect. That means also that inner purity is only possible through Shraddha, but not the external Shraddha, but internal Shraddha. Of course, you start with the physical Shraddha, means attention to detail, awareness, and this is how Amma says, one-pointedness and so on. And Amma gives us many methods by which we can increase our internal Shraddha, which many of you are probably already practicing. In the category of devotion, we have chanting a mantra, singing bhajans, doing some puja, or just, feeling love for Amma, meditating on Amma, meditating with Amma in the live streams, all these things. And one other that Amma has recommended before, which not everybody might know, is to talk to your mind. In other words, if the mind is telling you to do something that's not really a good idea, instead of getting all hung up in your head, you can say, just talk to the mind. Why do you want me to do that? You know that that's not going to get us anywhere. It's actually, we did that before and we were miserable afterwards, right? And why are you telling me that that guy is a bad guy? Because he's not. He's just another person like me. And why are you saying that this job is a bad job, I shouldn't do it, I should do something else? You're just restless. You're never satisfied. You can talk to the mind like that. So this is called In the Yoga Sutras, it's called Pratipaksha Bhavana, which means you just take the opposite stance that your mind is taking. It's kind of like playing the devil's advocate against your mind. Try it. It works. The third point is steadfastness in knowledge and yoga. Here, Shankaracharya has something nice to say. I mean, he latches onto this one because anything about knowledge he really likes. Knowledge consists in understanding the nature of things. Amma has said that also, the nature of the world, such as the self, as taught in the scripture and by the guru, right? So there's a guru, you can't escape it. Yoga consists of converting what has been learned into one's own direct perception by concentration through the subjugation of the senses. Fearlessness, purity of heart, and steadfastness in knowledge and yoga, these form the divine wealth. So according to Shankaracharya, these three are super important, obviously, but he just took those three and said that's, the main meat of it. But I want to point out something about his commentary, which is that when he says knowledge is this and then is the understanding of the teachings of the guru, and then yoga is converting it into your experience, that's the same as Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Listening to the teachings, contemplating on them, and then assimilating them through deep meditation. So this is Shankaracharya's interpretation of the meaning of this verse. Another commentator has some nice words to share. One who is able to distinguish between the things that are lasting and those that are evanescent, not lasting, is gifted with knowledge. It is yoga when one seeks that which is permanent and shuns that which is impermanent. So both of them are saying one is knowledge, the other one is how you practice that in your life. That's what yoga is. Typically in the Gita, yoga means the application of something. And because the Gita is Vedanta, it's usually Vedantic thinking. And this commentator also says, great is the result when there is steadfastness in the pursuit of both knowledge and yoga. We may have one where we have the knowledge but we can't practice it. Or we're good at practicing things but we don't understand the knowledge. So we will need both. That's where the challenge lies. We can't be good at just one of them. A similar point was also made in chapter 13. So in that chapter, it was like the main sadhana for that chapter. I think it was the concluding verse of chapter 13. And the idea is that the other steps of cultivating the virtues are the preparatory steps. Now, the next word is charity, which is dhanam in Sanskrit. And Shankaracharya says it's like you give out food, soup kitchen, like we're doing at Hasid House every month. But he adds one other thing, which is you do it within your own power. So you don't have to overdo it. Whatever you can do, you have done your duty. And Jnanadev says, to one in distress, not refusing help through body, speech, mind, or wealth, even though they may be an enemy. This is dhanam, this is charity. I'll say it again because it was a little hard to follow. To one in distress, not refusing help through body, speech, mind, or wealth, even though they may be an enemy. And he gives an example also, imitating the behavior of the roadside tree, which never hesitates to give its leaf, flower, shade, fruit, or root to a passerby. That is charity. So we have to emulate the tree. Offer wholeheartedly to a weary one whatever may be available. That is charity, which enables one to get a vision of liberation. So he's really praising it. This is Jnanadev. He's saying that you can get like a sneak preview of liberation by doing that. This quality also came in chapter 10, verse 5. And it was included as one of Krishna's divine glories. So you know it's definitely very divine quality. And Krishna is going to come back to it again in the next verse, in the next chapter rather. So why is it important? Well, I can think of 3 reasons. One is when we give to a deserving person, right? Somebody who is not going to, you can't give money basically. That's because you don't know what they're going to use it for. They might get drugs or alcohol or something else. So you have to give something to someone who's going to use it properly. And then that helps expand our minds. Because we identify with them, these people in need, even if just for a short while. And that engenders a feeling of oneness, reducing that sense of separation and like otherness that we would feel otherwise. The next idea is that it reduces greed, which is the opposite of charity. You can't be charitable and greedy at the same time. So while you're being charitable, at least at that time your greed is subdued. And the third is charity. When you go, it's just writing a check is one thing. That's too easy, I would say. Not that it's not appreciated, but it means we have to try sometime to mingle with the people who are really struggling. Then we get a reminder that someday we too will have to let go of everything. These are people who may have very little in their lives, and then either we will leave all of our positions or our positions will leave us. One way or another, we're going to have to part with them. That's why Amma says, as we come into this world with nothing and we leave the same way. And she loves that story about Alexander, the Emperor Alexander, who, when he died with nothing. And he told his helpers to bury him with his hands projecting out of the casket with their palms up. And they asked why. And he said, this is when he was on his deathbed, the whole world should see that even the great Alexander could not take anything with him. So we need to be mentally prepared at all times. So it doesn't hurt to ask yourself every once in a while, am I ready? Can I give up everything right now? And if not, what is holding me back? Why can't I just let go of everything and just leave this body right now? The answer that comes to you when you ask that question is going to be a very important area that we need to work on. Because we cannot be attached and detached at the same time. So either we're going towards detachment or going towards attachment. The 5th quality mentioned in this verse is inner restraint. It's control of the senses in the book, I believe. But we can call it inner restraint, which is a little more, seems a little more close, something we might be able to do. And in Sanskrit, it's called Dhamma. Jnanadev has some really nice examples that are metaphorical, and they metaphorically represent inner restraint. Severing clear the attachments of the senses to their objects, in the way a warrior with a sword in his hands cuts his enemy clean. Wow. Go for it, Jnanadev. Fettering all the senses and handing them over to pratyahara, which means withdrawal of the senses, like a tortoise pulls its legs, head, and tail in. Fettering all the senses and handing them over to pratyahara so that the storm of the sense objects cannot dash against the doors of the senses. His similes are so beautiful, right? And the third example he gives is when the fire of non-attachment is applied at the 10 gates of the senses, the propensity to acquire and enjoy things, clinging eternally to one's mind, departs forever. So cultivating non-attachment means you are no longer a slave to all of these impulses, which is very liberating. And another commentator has said, the senses are prone to indulgence, but when unrestrained, they harm the enjoyer. So we think that we're enjoying something, but when they're unrestrained, when we leave this senses to do whatever they want, then they come back and end up hurting us. Curbing them is the first step on the path of discipline. Mastery over the senses brings with it all blessings leading to the divine. So that's why it is mentioned in many scriptures, and Amma also says, first we have to curb the wild horses of our senses, and then all the other steps will be much easier. The organs of sense and action need not and cannot be stopped. It's impossible to stop them completely. So when we say Dhamma, or self-restraint or inner restraint, it means regulation. We're regulating those senses so that we can kind of keep things under control. You can think of it as a traffic cop. So if there's nobody there, it's like the Indian roads where just people do whatever they want, and there are so many accidents. But even in India now they have traffic police and even traffic lights. So they're not suppressing the traffic, right? They're just regulating it so that nobody gets hurt. So like that, the same thing is Dhamma, or sense control or inner restraint. It's not suppression. Some people think it's suppression, but it's definitely not. It's just regulating things so that we don't suffer. And then the senses start to function only to our will and judgment, not their own. So, for example, we don't speak or listen to what isn't good for our spiritual growth. And the same for what we look at, what we smell, how we use our hands and legs and everything. So that means we have 10 things to deal with, the 5 perceptual organs, and then we have 5 organs of action, like the mouth talks, the hands do things, legs walk places, etc. So all of these need to come under our control. And there's a beautiful passage from Amma's books. I think it's volume 1, because it happened like 40-something years ago. It was after morning darshan, and after giving darshan, Amma returned to her room, and she found Brahmacharani Saumya waiting for her. You know who Brahmacharani Saumya is now? Swamini Krishnamrita Prana. For the past several days, Saumya, or we'll say Swamini, had been hoping to speak with Amma, and Amma told her to come on that day. So she was waiting for Amma, and they both sat on the floor as Swamini asked her first question. When I feel attachment to something, I decide not to acquire it or accept it. Is such an attitude vairagya? Is that detachment? Amma replied, if the attachment to that thing will lead to what is unreal, then your attitude is correct. It is vairagya, it is detachment. We have to know the real nature of each thing, and we must become convinced that physical things cannot give us true happiness. Even though we receive temporary satisfaction from them, they only lead to sorrow in the end. When we understand this fully, our passion for the objects of the senses will naturally diminish. Then it will be easy to disengage the mind from them. So again, here it's a combination of knowledge and yoga, practicing it. You need the knowledge to understand what the nature of everything is. And then you need the discipline to practice it. Then she told a story. A man who had a craving for payasam, that sweet pudding that we serve after the pujas, he went to his friend's birthday party. The dessert that day was, in fact, payasam, his favorite dish. So the man was so happy. He got a big bowl of it and tasted a little bit. It was heavenly. It had just the right amount of milk and sugar and cardamom and raisins and cashew nuts. everything was perfect. And just when he was about to take another spoonful, a huge cockroach fell into his bowl of payasam. Oh, what a dilemma. He loved payasam more than anything else. But he knew that cockroaches have a lot of diseases. So he had to throw out the whole bowl. The instant that he knew it was contaminated, he lost interest. Likewise, this is still Amma's talking, right? Once we are convinced that dependence on the senses will only bring harm and sorrow, we will gain the power to avoid these, even the things that normally hold great appeal for us. We'll find it easy to control the mind, just like the commentators were saying. This is detachment, vairagya. Seeing a cobra, a child who's unaware that it's poisonous may try to catch it. But will an adult do that? No way, right? Daughter, instead of trying to turn the mind away from things forcefully, it's better to develop detachment towards things by learning about their good and bad qualities. That way, control of the mind will come naturally. This is just like Krishna's teachings to Arjuna have been enjoyed by millions of people, maybe billions of people over the ages. Same thing goes for Amma's book. This advice to one person must have been read by millions of people, and now we're getting the benefit as well. The sixth quality or virtue mentioned is yajna. In the book it says sacrifice, but I think that's a loaded word for Westerners. Literally, the word yajna means a sacred offering, but we can give it an even broader interpretation of that. One commentator helps me with a really good explanation of how broad it should be. Any act that brings the maximum public good and that cures the actor of his or her selfishness, that is yajna. That is a sacred offering. It need not necessarily be a traditional ritual. Humility, glorifying God, and compassion to people, these are the marks of a well-performed yajna. So did you do a puja today? Oh no, I didn't have any flowers, I didn't have wicks, I didn't have oil. No, it doesn't matter. Just do something selfless. You've done your puja. So it's not just what you do in the puja room or whether you do austerities, because you could be, the demons even did austerities with the wrong attitude. So we should try to invoke the puja manobhava, as Amma always says. That means throughout the day, you try to make all of your actions, activities, and thoughts kind of like a puja, an offering. So if it's not worthy of being offered to Amma, then we should think twice. Why am I thinking about this? Why am I doing this, right? In the Gita, Krishna puts it in this way in chapter 3, verse 9. The world is bound by actions other than those performed for the sake of yajna. Therefore, earnestly perform action for yajna alone, free from attachment. So every time we forget that our life is an offering, we forget the puja manobhava, it means that we're creating at least a little bit of attachment, and we're becoming bound by that. And I love chapter 9, verse 27, which is Amma's birthday, right? 9/27. This verse is so perfect for Amma. It goes, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer and sacrifice, whatever you gift away, whatever austerity you practice, do it as an offering to the Supreme. I think Krishna chose chapter 9, verse 27, just because he knew Amma was going to be born on that day. It's too perfect for Amma. But just so you know, Shankaracharya interprets yajna in the traditional kind of classical way of ritual worship. So he takes a different route. The seventh quality is quality, or this is kind of like a habit, reading and studying the Shastras, which means scriptures, and the Sanskrit word is swadhyaya. What does that mean? It means reading the Vedas and other scriptures, and Shankaracharya says, seeking the intangible results. So, what kind of results are there? What options are there? Well, when you say the Vedas, remember I probably told you, 75% of the Vedas is dedicated to people's desires. If they want to attain something, they turn to they used to, I guess you would say the ancient version of Amazon.com. When you want something, they would go to the Vedas. I want a wife, I want a child. How do I get it? And then there'll be something in the Vedas saying, chant this, do this, and that's how you get it. So it was basically delivering what people wanted in their lives. But the idea is that they get stronger and stronger faith in the Vedas and the spiritual world as a result. But 25% of it alone is dedicated to liberation. So he's saying you should be doing the studying for liberation. You don't want any of these material benefits. And Jnanadev says something nice here, very good for us to remember. When we're studying the scriptures, how does he take it? Just as a mirror is cleaned over and over to enable one to see one's face at any time, in the same way, regular study of the scriptures and the Guru's teachings enable us to see God, our true self. So the idea is that every day we should dedicate some time to reading or studying scriptures. And that includes all of Amma's teachings too. Amma says we should read spiritual books for at least 15 minutes every day, no matter how busy we are. Because it's the most important thing in our life. Everything we're doing is for the sake of peace of mind. And then the scriptures are explicitly for that, so we should do that too. We should read that too. But when we say you should read scriptural books or Amma's books every day, don't save the worst time for it. You know, we'll probably take prime time hours for food, TV, socializing, and then we devotedly dedicate that time for reading scriptures after dinner when my stomach is full. All right, I'm going to read Amma's book. We're not going to even make it through the first page. So, reading here is parayanam in the Sanskrit verse. The Sanskrit word would be parayanam. It just means you're reading or chanting the scriptures without really grasping the meaning. But if you go one step further and you actually learn the meaning, it becomes swadhyaya. So swadhyaya is what is mentioned here. From the various commentaries, we can assume that it includes both. But it's important to understand the meaning as well, because even if you just memorize it somehow, that teaching will come to your rescue when you need it. That's why these kids, they're giving talks every day, right? And they say, I learned from Dhyanananda Swami, or I learned from Ram Kumar Swami, who's Mahatma Prakash Swami. They're learning, and they just memorized it, but then when something happened, they remembered it, and then it activated in their life. So the same holds for us. It's not just chanting it for the sake of it. The eighth quality is tapas, which we can call austerity in English. Jnanadev has a beautiful way of putting it. Like an herb ends its life by giving its medicine to a needy person, or in the way incense exhausts itself to give a pleasant fragrance to others. In such ways, to wear out one's life, senses, and body for the attainment of the Supreme Brahman, that is tapas. Only one who makes full use of their discernment for attaining the self can succeed in austerities. Why do we need our discernment? Because you cannot do anything that is really difficult unless you have your proper judgment applied internally. And that's Amma's version of this, what Jnanadev is saying, is that it's better to wear away than rust away. That's why she always pushes her body to the maximum. When people ask her, why do you have to push yourself so much? She says, it's better to wear away than rust away. And another commentator says, it is possible for one to recast their mind, to improve upon their mode of life, and to give themselves over to spirituality. When all of these acts are undertaken deliberately, that is austerity or tapas. Tapas came earlier in the Bhagavad Gita also in chapter 4, verses 10 and 28. And it's also going to come in the remaining 2 chapters, 17 and 18. And one modern day commentator defines tapas as willful self-denial to establish mastery over one's senses. Pretty straightforward. Willful self-denial to establish mastery over one's senses. Perfect. But that means both physical and subtle bodies have to be trained. Examples are fasting, regulation of food intake. You're just regulating it, right? Silence, you're regulating your speech. And there's regulation of sleep. There's self-imposed durations of japa and meditation and so on. And the point is simply to transcend our likes and dislikes, which would prevent us from doing such things otherwise, instead of indulging our likes and dislikes. The final virtue for today is arjavam, which is uprightness. And this also came already in chapter 13. There, I think we called it rectitude, honesty, sincerity. There's many ways of translating it. One commentator says, straightforwardness is just the opposite of crookedness. So when people ask you all kinds of questions from different angles and they're just trying to check you out and like maybe catch you in some trap or some kind, that's like crookedness. Or they act like your friend and they just want to get information out of you so they can tell everybody something, you know. This happens. There are people who are like that. So the opposite of that. And we are crooked sometimes too when we have some real strong vasanas about something. So the opposite of that is straightforwardness, arjavam. It is the act of harmonizing one's thoughts, words, and deeds on a noble purpose or on noble purposes, frankly and openly. So when you look at it that way, it's basically our thoughts, words, and deeds are all aligned. Not so easy to accomplish. But just to make it more challenging, Shankaracharya says this should be a constant attitude. It's not like just when you're listening to the Gita class or when you're watching Amma's live stream or somebody's looking at you to see if you're meditating properly at satsang, you know, whatever it is. It should be all day long, even when nobody's looking at you, even when you're all alone. And if we don't at least try to make our thoughts, words, and deeds aligned, it can start to create a split personality, and it can become extreme split personality if it gets really bad. And nobody else is going to suffer but us. Because if we're not truthful to others, how can we be truthful to ourselves? So it's really an important quality that we all need to cultivate, and it feels really good whenever you can experience it. I don't think it's so easy. I'm not able to do it 100% of the time, but whenever we feel like all three are in line, it's a really good feeling. And we have 17 more to go, which we will deal with next week. And I actually found that there was some questions remaining from last time, which was 4 months ago. Sorry, I didn't check that file until today. So there were some people who wanted the links to the previous classes. I think if you already sent a email, then you should check your spam folder, because it's probably in your spam folder. And if anyway you want to register this email address to your mail, I think it's going to come up in the chat window now. In case you don't see that and you just want to hear it verbally, it's MA Center, Chicago, all one word, MACENTER CHICAGO at ammagroups.org, AMMAGROUPS.org. And if you register that, it's much less likely that it's going to go into your spam folder. It shouldn't go at all, actually. And there was one person who also requested the live stream. I hope this person, Tom, I hope you got access already. If you didn't, please, I forwarded your email address, and you should be getting an email. And again, register that same email address so it doesn't go into your spam folder. There was also a request from one Apurva, and we'll need you to send your email address to that one I told you, and it's in the chat window. Give us your email address, please, and then we'll accommodate your request for the previous Gita videos. There was one other genuine question, not just something we can resolve with email. This person said, I'm a heavy caffeine drinker due to my type of work and my health situation. I saw one of the Swamis drinking tea, not coffee, during Amma's programs, and San Ramon also serves tea for Sevites. Did Amma give any advice on having coffee and how it affects our spiritual growth? Okay. Hang on, I'm just going to get this a little bit bigger on my screen. Okay, well, I would say, as with everything, it depends on the person. It varies from person to person. So something like caffeine, I mean, I would imagine your health history, your environment, I mean, like the working environment, your family environment, your natural environment, all these things will have an impact on whether you should take certain kinds of foods or beverages. And also how you use it, you know. If you're using it way too much, like you seem to be suggesting, you should probably check with your doctor and find out whether it's actually healthy for you physically. Because for spirituality to work, the body needs a certain, minimum health condition. Otherwise, it's impossible to just think of spirituality when your body falls apart. And typically, with a lot of caffeine and such drinks, you start to get acidity. So it becomes a hassle for anybody. But if we go back in time, Amma used to ban coffee and tea completely, but that was about 35 to 40 years ago. And in the early 90s, right around the time that I got there, chai was finally allowed. And coffee became regularly available in the late 90s. And now there's a cafe with cappuccino. So obviously it's not a sin to have tea, chai, and coffee. And think about it. For some people, they might feel that's inappropriate. In an ashram, cappuccino? I can't believe it. And I actually had a negative reaction once when a businessman from Italy came. It was sometime in the mid-90s. And I was deputed to show him around the ashram. And then we spent like an hour and a half showing him everything. All the places of worship and where we do all of our sadhana and on where we meditate. where the pujas take place. And after this long tour, he says, I know what you guys need. He's from Italy, right? I know what you need, a gelato machine. I was like, a what? A gelato machine. I said, what is that? Anyhow, needless to say, we did not get a gelato machine in the mid-90s. But, you know, things have changed quite a bit. And so it depends on the person, really. Because what if there's a person who drinks cappuccino every day and just can't let go of it? But he or she really wants to spend some time with Amma and Amritapuri, they might not come if there wasn't cappuccino. So just because people have their creature comforts, these are the comforts that they had at home, presumably. And it's like the make or break point. So, okay, if I can have cappuccino, then I'm going to Amritapuri. Then I'll figure it out after that. Then you get to Amritapuri, you're in Amma's presence. Maybe you not just drink coffee, you have other habits you want to get rid of. But that one thing you could cling on to, cappuccino or coffee or tea or whatever it is, that just gets you in the door. But once you're with Amma, the vibration, the energy is just tremendous. So they may be able to relinquish all of these in Amma's presence, depending how serious they are about it. So basically, any dependence that we create in our life is a limiting factor on the spiritual path. So it's not just about tea or coffee. It can be so many other things. If we are depending on that for some kind of satisfaction or whatever it is, it's a crutch. And it prevents us from walking, alone on the path. I mean, Guru is not a crutch. The Guru is the goal. But she also walks with us. That's why she's such a great Guru. But all of our dependencies, like different kinds of food and comforts, and also our anger and our jealousy, these are our companions on the path sometimes. We have to relinquish those too. So it's not just physical things. The more difficult things that we need to really apply ourselves on are the inner problems. The rajas in us, the restlessness, the indolence, the inertia, all that. So I think the general rule of thumb, which is also Amma's approach, is to attack the little ones first. And then build up your inner strength and your confidence and gradually intensify your efforts. Don't attack like the heavyweight boxer of the world, straight away. You just make yourself stronger first and then take on the big boys. And it usually goes better that way. So we just had one actual question, and I will be looking at this now every week. Sorry for the hiatus in all these things. And I look forward to joining you all again next week. And for today, we will close with those two first mantras. And those who have time can stay with us and meditate for some time. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. The class is officially concluded, so only if you have time to join us, please close your eyes. Slow down your breathing. Check your posture. And take a few long, deep breaths. With each long, deep breath, the mind becomes more and more calm and dives deeper along with the breath. Let the body and mind relax further and further with each breath. Feeling Amma's subtle presence all around you and within you. Now turn your awareness to the flow of your breathing process. Witness the rhythmic flow of each and every inhalation and exhalation. Now, as you witness each and every inhalation and exhalation, identify with the witness consciousness, simply watching the breath as it naturally flows in and out. It is such a peaceful feeling to witness, not being involved. The witness has no problems. The witness is ever free. No worries, no anxiety or fear. The more we identify with that pure conscious of witnessing, the more divine qualities we can cultivate. Whenever we lose contact with that witness consciousness, it is always something to do with the body and mind. It is never due to the Atman. When the restless mind tries to pull us elsewhere, remind it that we are focusing on the breath and bring it back to the focal point. We may have to do it over and over again. It's a training process for the mind. But well worth it. Now let us try to visualize Amma in our hearts. And let us seek her blessings and help in cultivating all of these divine virtues, which are simply none other than her qualities. We're going to need her grace. So let us pray to her mentally, seeking that grace and help. Now let us conclude with the final prayer. Take a long deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnam Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purna Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes again. Om Amriteshwariye Namaha. Thank you for joining us again. And we will be also singing bhajans from here day after tomorrow. Yes. So please join us. And we'll have the Gita class again next week.